I want you to picture the media landscape of the early 1990s for a second.
Okay.
It is so clean, so corporate. You know, you have these network news anchors who look like they were just manufactured in a factory somewhere.
Yeah, perfect hair, perfect diction, not a word out of place.
Exactly. And then on the radio, you have all these DJs who use that same, like, deep, fake baritone voice. Time for the morning zoo.
It was safe, it was sterilized.
Oh, it's incredibly sterilized. I mean, you have the gatekeepers, the SEC, the networks, the big book publishers, and they were controlling absolutely everything that reached the American public.
Right.
There was a very, very narrow lane of what was considered acceptable entertainment.
And then into all of that, you have this one guy, a guy who looks kind of like a heavy metal guitarist, speaks like a neurotic patient on a therapy couch, and is openly at war with his own bosses on the air.
Okay.
And somehow, this guy looks at that entire sanitized system and just says, I'm going to conquer all of it. And he didn't just say it. I mean, he statistically did it. And that's really what we are unpacking today. We aren't just talking about a shock jock.
Right.
That term is actually kind of reductive when you look at the data. We're looking at the numbers behind the title, The King of All Media. Because, and this is all in the source material, there was a specific moment in time where Howard Stern had the #1 movie, the #1 book, and the #1 soundtrack in the country.
All at the same time.
Simultaneously.
Which is just, it's unheard of. I mean, even if you look at modern stars like a Taylor Swift or The Rock, they don't usually hold the #1 spot in film, publishing, and music at the exact same second.
Precisely. It was a statistical anomaly. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how he did it. We're going to tear apart the biographical data to understand the psychology. We'll look at the court records from his long war with the FCC. And we are going to get technical on the financial structures of that $500 million Sirius deal. We want to understand how a painfully introverted kid from Long Island weaponized his own insecurities to build a business empire.
And when you say introverted, I think a lot of people might roll their eyes at that.
Oh, for sure.
Because the character of Howard Stern, the persona, feels so large, so loud, so confident. You'd assume he was the class clown.
Right.
The guy standing on the table in the cafeteria just screaming for attention.
And that is the first paradox we encounter, and honestly, it's probably the most important one. If you skip this part, you miss the whole story.
Right.
If you go back to his early life, he was born in 1954 in Queens. They moved to Roosevelt and then Rockville Center. He wasn't the loudmouth. When he transferred to Southside High School at age 15, the records, the anecdotes, they all describe him as a total introvert.
A total introvert, didn't talk to anyone kind of introvert.
Completely. In fact, if you look at his yearbook, it lists only one student activity membership in the Key Club.
That's it.
That's it. He wasn't the star of the school play. He wasn't the quarterback. He was the kid in the corner. His sister was also noted as being very, very quiet. It was, by all accounts, a quiet household.
So where does the desire to be heard come from? I mean, if you're that shy, usually you run away from the microphone. You don't make it your life's work.
Well, it seems to stem from a very complex dynamic with his father, Ben Stern.
Okay.
Ben was a radio engineer. He worked at a station called WHOM in Manhattan, and he co-owned a recording studio called Aura Recording, Inc. Now, Howard, as a kid, observed something very specific about his father. He's been on record saying he always felt his dad was critical of him, that his dad thought he was a dummy.
No, it's rough.
It is. But Howard noticed a loophole.
A loophole for affection. Or for respect.
Exactly. For respect. He noticed that his father treated the people he worked with, the on-air talent, with this immense reverence. Howard would visit the studio and he'd watch these voice legends like Don Adams.
The guy who played Maxwell Smart and Get Smart.
That's the one. He'd watch him recording lines, and he saw his dad's face just light up. He treated them like gods. So Howard thought, okay, maybe he could look at me with that kind of respect if I could get behind a microphone.
That is heavy. So the logic for him becomes, if I want Dad to love me, or at least respect me, I have to become a disembodied voice. I have to be the guy in the headphones.
Bingo.
Yeah.
It's a classic psychological transfer. He equated being on a microphone with being worthy of respect. And that's where the basement tapes come in.
Yes.
And this isn't just a kid playing pretend radio. He's down there in the dark, in his dad's basement in Long Island, and he's building a simulation of a world where he is powerful.
And the content of those tapes is surprising, right? You'd expect a kid in the 60s or early 70s to be, I don't know, mimicking the news or introducing Beatles records.
Right, but he wasn't doing that at all. He was doing the Howard Stern show before it even existed. He was doing a character called the Psychedelic Bee. He was doing prank calls. And here is the real kicker. Even then, as a kid, he was doing explicit shows.
Explicit. How so?
He was using marionettes to entertain his friends with these, let's just say, R-rated skits.
With puppets. He was doing R-rated stuff with puppets.
Or maybe even X-rated. And this is the critical insight here. The whole shock jock thing wasn't a marketing strategy he invented in his 30s to sell ads. It was his native language.
It was his default setting.
It was the only way he knew how to break through that feeling of invisibility he felt at school. He had to be so loud, so abrasive, and so shocking that you simply couldn't ignore him. The DNA of the entire show was being formed right there in that basement.
It's amazing that the content was explicit even then. It's like the impulse to shock was just hardwired into him from the beginning.
It seems so.
But he didn't go straight from the basement to stardom. The early career path sounds, well, it sounds like a disaster, frankly.
Disaster is a very fair word. It was a grind. He went to Boston University for Communications. He worked at the campus station WTBU. He actually co-hosted a show there called the King Schmaltz Bagel Hour.
The King Schmaltz Bagel Hour. That's a great name.
And it was canceled after its very first broadcast.
Why?
Because they did a sketch called Godzilla Goes to Harlem.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It was racially insensitive, obviously, and the university administration shut it down immediately. So the pattern of push boundaries, get punished started literally on day one of his broadcasting career.
Canceled after one show. That is some serious foreshadowing. But he graduates in 1976. Does he get a job in radio right away?
No, and this is a funny little detour in his story. He actually took a marketing role at a big advertising agency, Benton and Bowles. He was trying to be a straight corporate guy.
Right, fit into the system.
But he hated the department he was in. So he quit without giving notice to take a job in their creative department. Same company, just a different floor.
That is a bold move.
A little too bold. The creative department realized he was the same guy who had just quit the other department without notice, so they fired him after only 3 hours.
Fired after 3 hours. That has to be some kind of corporate record.
It definitely shows a certain a lack of conformity. He just didn't understand why the rules applied to him. But he eventually landed a real radio gig at WRNW in Briarcliff Manor, New York.
Okay.
And this is where we really need to talk about his commitment level, because I think people see the limousines and the Hamptons house today, and they just assume it was easy.
Right.
The pay at WRNW was $96 a week.
$96.
Oh.
A week. Even in the late 70s, you can't live on that in the New York area.
No, you absolutely can't. He was desperate to save money. So to make ends meet while he was working these insane split shifts, he was the production director, he did on-air shifts, he did public affairs.
He was doing everything.
Everything. To save money, he rented a room in a monastery.
Wait, hold on. Howard Stern, the guy who would later make a career out of strippers and burping contests, lived in a monastery.
In Armonk, New York, he was renting a room from the monks. I mean, can you imagine the contrast? He's spending his days trying to be this wild, crazy radio guy, and then his nights are in this silent, holy place just to save a few dollars.
That paints a very different picture of his work ethic.
It does. This was a guy willing to endure total isolation and poverty just to stay on the air.
That is some serious dedication. So he's at WRNW, then he moves to WCCC in Hartford, Connecticut. And this is where the team starts to come together, right?
Yes. Hartford is pivotal because that's where he meets Fred Norris. Fred was the overnight disc jockey, and anyone who listens to Stern knows that Fred Norris became the longest-serving member of the team, the sound effects genius, the writer. They met there in 1979.
Okay, so Fred's on board.
But the real stylistic shift, the birth of the persona as we know it, happened in Detroit at a station called WWWW.
WWWW4Ws. And that's where he decided to drop the DJ voice.
Exactly. I mean, up to that point, he had been trying to be a traditional DJ. He was trying to do the deep voice, the whole coming up next Led Zeppelin shtick. But the ratings weren't great. The station was struggling. So one morning, out of what seems like frustration or maybe just exhaustion, he made a conscious decision. He said he wanted to cut down the barriers, strip down all the ego, and be totally honest.
What does that even mean in practice on the radio?
It means if the coffee machine broke, he talked about it for 20 minutes. If he had a fight with his wife that morning, she talked about it. He realized that just talking, being raw, being himself, was way more compelling than introducing records. He stopped serving the music and started serving the personality.
So it's the moment the act became reality.
That's a great way to put it.
But Detroit didn't last.
Mm.
The station flipped formats to country, which he didn't love.
He hated it. He called his on-air name Hopalong Howie. It was a disaster.
Hop along, Howie.
Right. He couldn't see himself as a country DJ. So he moved to Washington, D.C., to a station called WWDC. And this is the final piece of the puzzle regarding the core team. This is where he was paired with a newscaster named Robin Quivers.
And the story of the meeting is interesting because she hadn't even met him when she took the job, had she?
She hadn't. She was a former Air Force nurse and a reporter in Baltimore. The station sent her a tape of Stern interviewing a prostitute on the air. That was her official introduction to him.
Most people would hear that and run for the hills.
She listened to it and accepted the job. She thought she would just come in, do the news, and leave, but as she later said, it wasn't that way. They had instant chemistry.
She became his anchor in more ways than one.
Literally and figuratively. She was the laugh track, she was his conscience, and she was the audience surrogate all rolled into one.
So the team is finally set. Howard, Robin, Fred. He's killing it in D.C. The ratings are tripling. And then the mothership calls. NBC. WNBC in New York. This was supposed to be the dream job.
It was the dream. I mean, returning to New York, the #1 market, working for the National Broadcasting Company. But as Stern later put it, it was welcome to my worst nightmare. And this is where the story really shifts from guy trying to make it to guy at war with the system.
Why? I mean, if he was getting the ratings, why did NBC hate him so much?
It was a culture clash. A massive, massive culture clash. NBC was a conservative corporate environment. They had just seen a critical news report on this new phenomenon of shock radio that featured Stern, and the executives were already nervous before he even started.
So they were on edge from day one.
They actually debated canceling his contract before he even broadcast a single show. Instead of firing him, they decided they were going to control him.
Control Howard Stern. Good luck with that plan.
It went about as well as you'd expect. They gave him this long list of restrictions. No sexual discussions, no religious discussions. In his first month, he got suspended for a sketch called Virgin Mary Kong.
Virgin Mary Kong.
Yeah, it was a video game sketch that involved men chasing the Virgin Mary around a singles bar in Jerusalem.
Okay, yeah, I can see 1982 NBC executives sweating through their suits over that one.
It got so bad that the station hired a lawyer specifically to listen to the show and operate a 7-second delay button.
You're joking.
I'm not. Think about that expense. They paid a lawyer a full-time salary just to sit there in a booth and censor their own morning guy. They also installed a program director named Kevin Metheny, whose sole job, it seems, was to enforce these rules.
And this is the guy Stern famously nicknamed Pig Virus on the air.
Yes. And this is so important. He didn't just complain about his boss behind his back. He made the boss a character on the show. He called him Pig Virus to millions of people. He attacked his appearance, his management style, his stutter. It was brutal, but it was captivating radio.
Because it's the ultimate workplace fantasy, right?
Yeah.
It's saying exactly what you think to your boss out loud.
Exactly. And he was also feuding with Don Imus, the other morning guy at the station. It was a completely toxic environment. But here is the thing about Stern the pressure cooker, just made him better. He tripled the ratings at WNBC. He was gaining market share. But the management just could not stomach the content.
They couldn't handle it.
Not at all. In 1985, right before he was supposed to go on air, they fired him. The official term they used was conceptual differences.
Fired while you're delivering the highest ratings the station had seen in 4 years. That has to sting.
Oh, absolutely.
But this leads directly to the WXRK era, the K-Rock era. And this is really where the explosion happens. He refused to leave New York, right? Didn't NBC offer him money to just go away?
They offered him $50,000 to leave town. It was basically, here's a check, please go be famous somewhere else.
Wow.
He declined. He said he wanted to stay in New York and, quote, kick NBC's ass. And he did. He signed with Infinity Broadcasting, moved to WXRK, and within a year, he was syndicated. This is the official start of the king of all media reign.
So let's talk numbers here for a second, because the scale of his popularity in the 90s is just... It's hard to grasp today with how fragmented media is.
It is really difficult to compare. I mean, today, a big podcast might have a few million downloads a month. At his peak at WXRK, Howard had 20 million daily listeners.
Big.
20 million people tuning in every single day. His show was syndicated in 60 markets across North America. He wasn't just a New York phenomenon anymore. He was a national event every single morning. If you drove through any major city in the U.S. during the morning commute, chances are half the cars were listening to him.
And he started branching out into other media, really testing the waters of his popularity. The pay-per-view specials were a huge part of this.
These were massive moneymakers and, more importantly, a proof of concept. In 1988, he did a special called Howard Stern's Negligee and Underpants Party. It grossed $1.2 million, but the really big one was on New Year's Eve, 1993. It was called the Miss Howard Stern New Year's Eve Pageant.
The one with the mock beauty pageant.
That's the one. It grossed $16 million. An estimated 400,000 households bought it. It broke the subscriber record for a non-sports pay-per-view event.
And the reviews were not great.
The New York Post called it the most disgusting 2 hours in the history of television. But it proved that his audience would pay directly for his content. This was the first real sign that a subscription model could work for him decades before he did it.
And then came the books. Private Parts.
Private Parts was a cultural juggernaut. It was released in 1993. Simon & Schuster, the publisher, did an initial print run of 225,000 copies, and they sold out in hours.
Hours.
In 5 days, it became the fastest-selling title in the publisher's history. It spent 20 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And what's fascinating about the book is that it really changed the perception of him.
How so? Because before that, he was just the monster, right? The shock jock.
Exactly. Before the book, he was just the dangerous guy who made fun of people. But the book was autobiographical. It was funny, yes, but it was also incredibly vulnerable. It told the story of his struggle, his marriage, his deep insecurities, the miscarriage his wife suffered.
It made him human.
It made him human. Stern himself said, "Suddenly, I was a mainstream performer who had real clout in the marketplace. I was bankable."
And that bankability led directly to the movie, which is so rare.
Yeah.
Radio guys don't usually become movie stars playing themselves.
It's incredibly rare. But the Private Parts film, released in 1997, topped the U.S. box office its opening weekend. It grossed over $41 million domestically. And you have to remember, the soundtrack, which Stern performed on, also hit #1 on the Billboard 200 chart.
So that's it. That's the trifecta.
That is the king of all media trifecta we talked about at the top. Movie, book, soundtrack, all #1, all at the same time.
But with all this success, he was just getting louder and more controversial. And, well, we have to talk about Fart Man.
Yes, we do, Fart Man.
The 1992 MTV Video Music Awards.
It's a defining image of the 90s, isn't it? Stern descending from the ceiling in this superhero costume that exposed his buttocks, playing a character named Fart Man.
It was pure shock value.
It was. But here's the deep dive nugget. He was actually developing a Fart Man movie with New Line Cinema.
A Fart Man movie? Seriously, why didn't that happen?
It fell apart over merchandising rights and content disputes. Stern wanted total creative control, and the studio wasn't sure they could sell Fart Man action figures to kids if the movie's content was super R-rated.
Yeah, that's a tough sell.
But it shows you just how much cultural capital he had at that moment, that a major Hollywood studio was seriously considering a Fart Man feature film.
It's absolutely wild. But while he was doing the superhero act, he was also getting involved in actual politics. And not just talking about it. He really ran for governor of New York in 1994.
He did. And at first, everyone thought it was a joke, a publicity stunt. He ran on the Libertarian Party ticket against the incumbent, Mario Cuomo. But if you look at his platform, it was surprisingly specific.
He had 3 main goals, right?
3 very clear, very simple goals. 1, reinstate the death penalty. 2, remove all highway tolls to improve traffic flow. And 3, limit all road work to the graveyard shift so it wouldn't disrupt commuters. He promised that once he passed those 3 things, he would resign and hand the governorship over to his lieutenant.
Look, for any commuter in the New York area, that roadwork platform is incredibly appealing.
It was. He won the Libertarian nomination by a landslide. People were taking it seriously. But the campaign ended because of the Ethics in Government Act.
What happened?
To be on the final ballot, he had to publicly disclose his personal finances. And Stern, being intensely private about his money, refused. He said it was none of their business, so he withdrew from the race.
It's none of your business, basically.
Exactly. But here is the amazing legacy of that run. George Pataki, the Republican who eventually won that election, acknowledged Stern's influence. In 1995, Pataki actually signed a bill limiting road construction on state roads to night hours.
No way.
Yes. It was nicknamed the Howard Stern Bill. So the guy in the Fartman costume actually changed public policy in New York State.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
But his relationship with authority wasn't usually that constructive. I have to talk about the FCC. Because this wasn't just a few complaints here and there. This was a war.
It was a war of attrition. And you have to understand how the FCC works. They can't find the talent. They find the station license holder.
The company that owns the station.
Right. And between 1990 and 2004, the FCC levied fines totaling $2.5 million against the station owners for Stern's content.
Wow. $2.5 million. That's a lot of money, even for a big broadcaster like Infinity.
It is. And the fines were for things that seem almost tame by today's internet standards, talking about sexual practices, bodily functions. But the FCC saw it as indecency, and it made Stern a massive liability. Every time he opened his mic, the station owners were sweating, wondering if it was going to cost them another $100,000.
And this all came to a head after the Janet Jackson incident.
Super Bowl XXVIII. The wardrobe malfunction. That changed everything. The Bush administration and the FCC cracked down hard on indecency.
The walls started closing in.
They were. Clear Channel, a huge radio conglomerate, dropped his show from several of their markets permanently. His own management at Infinity started strictly censoring him again, just like the old WNBC days. He said he felt dead creatively. He felt like he couldn't do his show anymore.
And this sets the stage for the biggest gamble in the history of radio, the move to Sirius. Let's just stop on 2004 for a second, because looking back from today, moving to streaming or satellite seems obvious. Everyone has Spotify or Apple Music. But we need to contextualize how insane this move was at the time.
It was widely viewed as career suicide. You have to remember, in 2004, you bought a radio, you turned it on, and music and talk came out for free. The idea that you would pay $12.95 a month for radio was laughable to most Wall Street analysts.
And Sirius wasn't a tech giant back then.
Not at all. Sirius was a distressed company burning through cash and fighting for scraps against its bigger rival, XM Radio.
So Stern is leaving a terrestrial radio audience of 20 million people, literally the biggest platform in the world at the time, for a platform that had, how many subscribers did Sirius have?
About 600,000 subscribers total. Not for his show, for the entire platform. He was essentially moving from playing the Super Bowl to playing a high school gym.
So why do it? Was it just the money? The headline was $500 million, which is obviously a lot of motivation.
The headline number is really misleading, and that's where the genius of the deal actually lies. That $500 million wasn't a salary check for him.
It wasn't.
No, that was a production budget for 5 years. He had to build the studios, pay the entire staff, pay the writers, pay Robin and Fred their huge salaries, all out of that bucket.
Okay, so he's essentially running a small media corporation himself.
Exactly. But the real wealth, the empire money, was in the stock incentives. This is the part that business schools should study. He negotiated these huge tranches of stock that would vest only if he hit massive subscriber targets. He was betting on himself. He bet that he could migrate his audience from free radio to a paid service.
And the analyst said he couldn't do it. I remember reading quotes saying things like, loyalty has a limit, and the limit is a credit card number.
They were so wrong. The Howard effect was immediate, and it was massive. In the first year, Sirius didn't just hit their subscriber target, they blew way past it. They added millions of new subscribers solely on the promise of his show. And on the day of his first broadcast in 2006, the first stock tranche vested.
And what was that worth?
He and his agent received stock worth $218 million.
Wow.
Just as a bonus.
So he essentially equity swapped his fame. He took his cultural capital and converted it directly into ownership of the platform itself.
And that's the big takeaway. He realized before almost anyone else that content was the king, not the distribution method. If the content is strong enough, people will buy the new hardware to get to it. He single-handedly took Sirius from a niche product for truckers and tech nerds to a mainstream necessity.
But it wasn't a completely smooth transition. His old bosses at CBS sued him.
They did. It got ugly. They claim he misused their airtime to promote his new Sirius show before he left. Stern called it a personal vendetta by Leslie Moonves, who was the head of CBS at the time. They eventually settled for Sirius, paying CBS $2 million, but it just showed how bitter that breakup was.
So he lands at Sirius. He has two channels, Howard 100 and Howard 101. He's completely uncensored. He can swear. He can be as explicit as he wants. But something interesting happens over the next decade. He evolves.
The evolution is the defining theme of his later career.
Hmm.
Once he had total, absolute freedom, he didn't just double down on the shock value. He actually started to broaden his horizons in a way nobody expected.
And the big public signal for this was America's Got Talent.
Right. In 2011, he replaces Piers Morgan as a judge on this huge family-friendly primetime network show. And he took it so seriously, he actually forced them to move the entire production of the show to New York so he could do his radio show in the morning and then go judge in the afternoon.
And he was good at it.
He was. It introduced him to a demographic that would never in a million years have listened to the radio show, grandmothers, kids. And they saw he was actually a thoughtful, constructive, and often kind critic.
And we also see him picking up these serious hobbies, photography.
He got obsessed with photography. He started shooting these high-fashion layouts for Hampton's magazine. He established his own company, Conlin Road Photography. It wasn't just a celebrity whim. He studied it. He learned the craft. It really aligns with that obsessive personality we saw in the basement with the tapes. He has to master things.
And speaking of personality, he's been so open about therapy in recent years.
He credits psychotherapy and also transcendental meditation, which he actually started back in the 70s for saving his life and his sanity. He's spoken at length about how therapy helped him realize how his narcissism and his constant need for attention were affecting his relationships, especially his first marriage.
That the character was taking over.
Exactly. He realized the character he created was protecting him, but it was also isolating him from everyone he loved.
And that introspection led to some public apologies, didn't it? I know there was a controversy a few years ago where an old sketch resurfaced.
Yes, in 2020, Donald Trump Jr. tweeted a video of an old sketch from a 1993 pay-per-view special where Stern appeared in blackface, parodying Ted Danson. It was, obviously offensive. And instead of doubling down or making excuses, Stern addressed it and admitted it. He said, and this is a direct quote, "The shit I did was fucking crazy."
Wow.
And he credited his years in therapy for helping him understand why that behavior was wrong and how much he has changed as a person.
It's interesting you mentioned Trump Jr. because Stern and Donald Trump go way, way back. Trump was a frequent guest on the show for years.
He was. They were, in a sense, radio friends. Trump was the perfect guest for the old show. He was loud, opinionated, willing to rate women's looks on a scale of 1 to 10. But politically, they diverged significantly.
Right. Stern isn't a Republican.
Not at all. He was a supporter of John Kerry in 2004 and urged his listeners to oust George W. Bush. And despite his long history with Trump, Stern became very critical of Trump's presidency. He even said in 2020 that he thought Trump despises his own supporters. It just shows that Stern separates personal loyalty from his political views.
He also interviewed President Biden recently, in 2024.
Which really completes the journey, doesn't it? From being known as Fart Man to doing an in-depth, sit-down interview with the sitting president in the United States. It is a trajectory that simply shouldn't be possible.
And the style of that interview was significant.
It was. It wasn't a gotcha political interview. It was a deep dive into Joe Biden's life, his story of loss, his psychology. It was Stern doing what Stern does best now. Empathetic, long-form listening.
I want to touch on the personal side of things before we wrap up, because you mentioned that the book Private Parts dealt with his marriage to Allison Burns. They were college sweethearts.
They were. They met at Boston University, married in 1978 when they were both just 24 years old. They had 3 daughters together, but the work completely consumed him.
He's admitted that, right?
Oh, many times. Stern admitted he was totally neurotic and consumed with work. He prioritized the show over everything else in his life. They divorced in 2001. It was reportedly amicable, but it was clearly the casualty of his ambition. And he has spoken about that with a lot of regret over the years.
But he found love again with Beth Ostrowski.
Yes, a model and television host. They married in 2008, and this relationship really highlights that softer side of him that we talked about. They are huge animal advocates. They foster hundreds and hundreds of cats at their homes.
Hundreds.
The estimate is approximately 200 cats a year come through their home. They have dedicated rooms for it, they nurse them back to health, and then they find them permanent homes. It's a far, far cry from the old shock jock image.
So the king of all media is on the floor feeding kittens.
If you follow Beth on Instagram, you will see Howard Stern, this media giant, sitting on the floor feeding tiny little kittens with a bottle. It's a surreal image.
And he's also dealt with some serious health scares. The king of all media is mortal it turns out.
He had a very serious scare in 2017. They found a growth on his kidney. He was convinced it was cancer. He thought, this is it. I'm going to die. Turned out to be a benign cyst, but it shook him to his core. It made him confront his own mortality in a big way.
And he's also battled OCD.
Yes, obsessive-compulsive disorder, since college. He writes about it in his books, the rituals he had to perform to alleviate his anxiety, touching things a certain number of times, counting everything. It's been a constant struggle for him, and it explains a lot of his obsessive nature and his drive for control over his environment.
So as we look back on this entire career,
Yeah.
from the 96 stars a week monastery days to the $500 million satellite deal, from the explicit basement tapes to the White House interview, what is the big takeaway? What does the Howard Stern story actually tell us?
It tells us that authenticity, no matter how abrasive or weird it is a currency. Stern didn't just break the rules. He monetized the breaking of rules. But I think more importantly, he proved that you can mature without losing your edge. He's successfully pivoted from being a renegade to being an elder statesman of broadcasting.
Which is a path most shock jocks don't take.
They don't. Most of them just fade away or become caricatures of themselves.
He evolved.
It really is a study in survival and adaptation.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a really fascinating question about freedom of speech and personal growth.
What's that?
Well, Stern spent the first half of his career fighting the government, his bosses, everyone, for the right to say absolutely anything, no matter how offensive. He was a First Amendment absolutist.
Right.
But now, in the second half of his career, he looks back at some of those very things he fought to say, like the racial sketches or some of the cruel comments, and he regrets them. He calls them crazy and fucking nuts.
That is a paradox, isn't it? It is. And so the question for you, the listener, is this. Does his career prove that true freedom of speech includes the freedom to eventually silence your own past self? Is the ultimate victory of free speech not just the right to speak your mind, but the wisdom to evolve and know when you were wrong?
That is something to think about.
Yeah.
From the king of all media to the king of all evolution.
Oh.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Howard Stern. We'll catch you on the next one.